You ever buy something you knew was a bad idea, but curiosity got the better of you anyway? I did. It was a small bookstore tucked away where no store should have been. The book I bought wasn't just old, it knew me, and after that, nothing has been the same. I bought a book that revealed my worst fears. Then reality began to fall apart. The rain had been falling all day, an unbroken sheet of grey draping over the city. I watched the droplets race down my apartment window, merging together and disappearing, much like my thoughts these days. Writing had once been a way to escape from the chaos of life, but now, it felt like I was trying to dig my way out of quicksand. Every word pulled me deeper into exhaustion and self-doubt. I was a freelance writer, though I hadn't been writing much lately. My income, always precarious, had become even more unstable. Each assignment seemed like a Herculean task, the simplest, projects dragging on for days, sometimes weeks, as I wrestled with my dwindling creativity. There was a time when words flowed effortlessly, when stories spilled onto the page with a natural rhythm, but those days felt like they belonged to someone else. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd written something that truly excited me. The isolation wasn't helping. My small apartment, cluttered with stacks of books, old notes, and unfinished manuscripts, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. It was always too quiet. Occasionally, the muffled sounds of traffic or distant conversations would seep in through the thin walls, but they did little to break the heavy silence. Most days, I wouldn't speak a word out loud until the late afternoon, when I'd finally force myself to venture out for groceries or a cup of coffee, just to see some other human faces. Even then, my interactions were fleeting and empty, quick exchanges with baristas or cashiers, who probably wouldn't recognize me if I came in the next day. My friends, the ones I had shared laughs and secrets with in college, had all moved on. Two busy lives filled with families, careers, and social circles that I no longer fit into. The group chats that once buzzed with messages were now quiet, just like everything else. I would scroll through them sometimes, reading old conversations and wondering how the thread had become so frayed. I had tried reaching out, making small attempts to reconnect, but our conversations always felt forced, as if we were actors playing parts in a show that had long since been cancelled. Eventually, I stopped trying. The solitude grew thicker, and I began to fear it was becoming a part of me, wrapping itself around my bones like a second skin. It was on one of those bleak, rainy days that I decided I couldn't stay cooped up inside any longer. I grabbed my coat and left my apartment, not knowing where I was headed, just that I needed to escape, if only for a little while. The rain was cold as it hit my face, a sharp contrast to the stifling warmth of the apartment. I wandered aimlessly through the city, past familiar cafes and storefronts, not feeling any particular draw to any of them. My feet carried me down streets I rarely ventured, through neighborhoods that grew older and more weathered the deeper I went. Eventually, I found myself standing in a narrow, dimly lit alleyway I didn't recognize. It was tucked between two towering brick buildings, their facades stained dark with age and rain. I hesitated, wondering if I had taken a wrong turn somewhere. But then I saw it, an old wooden sign swaying slightly in the damp breeze. Lost Pages, it read, the letters barely visible under the layers of dust and grime. The bookstore's narrow windows were cluttered with faded paperbacks and old-fashioned leather-bound volumes, their covers dulled by time. The glass panes were fogged with moisture, and the light within was dim and flickering. Curiosity piqued. I pushed open the door, and the old-fashioned bell above the frame jangled faintly. The air inside was heavy, filled with the scent of aged paper and wood polish. It was darker than I expected, with most of the light filtering in from the narrow front windows. The store was cluttered, chaotic even, with stacks of books piled high on tables and chairs, shelves sagging under the weight of countless volumes, narrow aisles twisted and turned, leading deeper into the shadows. I wandered through the narrow aisles, running my fingers over the books that seemed to belong to another era. Some were printed in faded typefaces, their covers cracked and peeling, while others looked like handmade journals, stitched together by someone's careful hands, long ago. The deeper I ventured, the quieter the world seemed to grow. The hum of the city fading into the background as if I had stepped into another time altogether. It was then that I saw it. The book lay on a small table tucked away in the back, almost hidden under a pile of yellowing maps. It was a small, nondescript, leather-bound book, no larger than a pocket diary, and the cover was worn. Its once rich brown faded to a dull, murky shade. There were no words on the spine, no title or author's name to give any hint as to what it contained. I picked it up, feeling an odd chill travel through my fingers as they brushed against the leather. It felt cold to the touch, much colder than any book should be. I opened it, expecting to see faded text or blank pages, but the pages weren't entirely blank. There were faint marks, almost like shadows of words, that seemed to shimmer and shift as I tilted the book under the dim light. It was as though the text was hiding, revealing itself only from certain angles. The sound of a floorboard creaking made me jump. I hadn't noticed the elderly man standing behind the counter, watching me with a faint, unreadable expression. He seemed to blend into the shadows, his clothes faded and old. "Just like everything else in the shop, find something interesting?" he asked, his voice rough and gravelly. I held up the book. "What's this?" I asked, more to break the silence than out of any real expectation for an answer. The old man's eyes glinted in the low light. "The book finds those who need it," he said, as if reciting a well-practiced line. There was a hint of a smile on his lips. Or perhaps, those it needs. I didn't know what to say to that, but something about the book held my attention. I felt an urge to take it with me. I glanced back at the man. "How much?" I asked. His smile widened ever so slightly. "For you, $5. It seemed too cheap for such an old book, but I reached into my wallet, handed him the money, and tucked the book under my arm. As I turned to leave, the old man called after me. "Be careful what you find," he said, his voice low and almost drowned out by the sound of the door creaking open. I glanced back, but he had already turned away, vanishing into the stores. Shadowed depths. Back in the quiet of my apartment, the book sat on my coffee table like a dark presence, a strange weight in the room. I couldn't seem to ignore it. It was as though it was waiting for me to open it, to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden within its pages. I finally sat down, picked it up, and cracked it open once more. Words filled the first page in a delicate, slanted script that looked handwritten, as if someone had carefully penned each letter. The words described a memory I had buried long ago, one that sent a shiver down my spine. It was from when I was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. My parents had taken me to a fair one summer night, filled with bright lights and music. Had wandered off, distracted by a booth selling trinkets, and before I knew it, my parents were nowhere to be found. I remember the panic that had seized me, the suffocating feeling of being lost in a sea of strangers. Hours seemed to pass before a security guard found me crying and reunited me with my frantic parents. How could this be? I had never told anyone about that experience, not in such vivid detail. Yet, here it was, written out in the book as if someone had been there with me, seeing and feeling everything I had in that moment of fear. The next morning, the unsettling memory from the book lingered in my mind, refusing to be dismissed. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had read a similar story somewhere before, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. It wasn't impossible. I had been under a lot of stress lately. I had to shake off the feeling and get out of the apartment. A walk would do me good. I put on my coat and left the apartment, letting the crisp autumn air fill my lungs. I walked aimlessly, allowing the city to swallow me up. The sound of traffic, the chatter of people, the hum of the city. It was all strangely soothing. My feet carried me through familiar streets, until I ended up in a quieter part of town. I had walked here many times before. I knew these streets well, or so I thought. I had barely taken a few steps down a narrow side street when I felt a strange sensation wash over me. A tingling chill that prickled the back of my neck. The street looked the same, yet different. There was something off about it, something I couldn't quite place. I glanced around, suddenly aware that the street signs didn't match the names I remembered. Panic began to creep in, and I reached for my phone to check the GPS. But when I pulled up the map, my location was a blank, grey void. I closed the app and reopened it, thinking it was just a glitch, but the result was the same. No roads, no landmarks, no street names, just an empty screen. A wave of dizziness swept over me, and I felt as if the world had shifted somehow, as though I had walked into a different version of the city. I continued walking. I passed buildings I didn't recognize, shops that hadn't been there the last time I visited this part of town. The more I walked, the more disoriented I became, and soon, I couldn't tell which way I had come from. It wasn't long before a thick fog began to roll in, wrapping itself around the streets like a blanket. It came in fast, swallowing up the pavement and rising up to knee level. The fog was dense, more like smoke than mist. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. My heart pounded in my chest as the world seemed to fade away. Consumed by the murk, my legs trembled, and I stumbled forward. Driven by a need to escape the suffocating fog, I turned down another street, then another. I began to run, until I finally saw a break in the fog, a familiar intersection up ahead. I staggered out of the haze, collapsing onto a bench at the side of the road. The fog was still there, hanging over the street like a curtain, but it didn't seem to reach me anymore. I could see the familiar shops and cafes now, the traffic flowing smoothly, as if nothing unusual had happened. I sat there for a long time, catching my breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. Had I imagined it? It all seemed impossible, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. But when I checked the time, nearly 2 hours had passed. 2 hours of wandering in a place that shouldn't have existed. I couldn't explain it, and a part of me didn't want to. I just wanted to go home and forget about it. After the disorienting events of the day, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat at my desk, the dim glow of the lamp casting a soft halo of light over the pages of the book. I had to know what it would reveal next, no matter how unnerving. My hands shook as I opened the leather cover, bracing myself for whatever story might appear. Slowly, the faint traces of words began to surface on the page, growing clearer with each passing moment. The text described a claustrophobic feeling, a fear of being trapped in a small space, and of the walls closing in. It talked about the sensation of suffocating, the inability to breathe, and the irrational certainty that the space itself was shrinking. The fear was so vividly described that I could almost feel the walls pressing in around me. I closed the book abruptly, my pulse quickening. I stood up and began pacing the room, trying to shake off the creeping sensation of unease, but then I noticed something strange. As I passed by the wall near my bed, I thought I saw it move, just a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, like a breath. I turned quickly, staring at the spot, but it was still, silent. It had to be my imagination. I was letting the book get to me, feeding into my own anxieties. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was all in my head, but when I stepped closer, I felt a soft vibration, almost like a heartbeat. I reached out and placed my hand against the wall. It was warm, too warm. And there was a subtle give to the surface, like it wasn't quite solid. I jerked my hand back, my breath coming in short gasps. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the wall. It pulsed again, and this time, I was sure of it. It was moving, expanding outward ever so slightly, then contracting again. The room seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker, as though the walls were pressing in from all sides. Desperation clawed at my mind. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and approached the wall, gripping the handle with trembling fingers. If there was something wrong with the wall, I needed to see it for myself. I pressed the blade against the surface and dragged it downward. Tearing through the wallpaper, beneath the surface, a dark substance oozed out. A thick, viscous fluid that glistened under the dim light. The wall itself seemed to throb, like an open wound. And I could see a network of veins coursing just below the surface. pulsating with a dark fluid that seemed to breathe along with the room. I stumbled back, horrified by the sight, as the walls seemed to bulge inward, suffocating me with their closeness. The room grew warmer, the air stagnant and heavy. I could barely think, barely breathe. I backed toward the door, desperate to escape. I flung the door open and fled out into the hallway, gasping for air. The corridor outside was cool, blessedly still, and I collapsed against the opposite wall, my breath uneven. I didn't know how long I sat there, trembling, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just seen. When I finally summoned the courage to look back into the apartment, the walls appeared normal, solid, undisturbed. The tear in the wallpaper was gone. I eventually went to sleep. Although I barely slept that night, the morning light filtered through the curtains. The book sat closed on the desk, its leather cover cracked and worn. I had almost convinced myself not to open it again, but my mind kept returning to the feeling of the wall under my fingers, pulsing with a life of its own. I needed answers, and I was sure they wouldn't come from the pages of that cursed book. I made my way out of the apartment and headed back to where all this had started, the old bookstore. Lost pages. I walked through the crowded streets, the noise of the city buzzing in the background, but it all felt distant. As I approached the narrow alleyway, a sense of dread gnawed at me. I had to find the bookstore, but when I reached the spot where I had first stumbled upon lost pages, there was nothing there. The alleyway was narrow and cluttered with old crates and garbage bins, but no bookstore. There wasn't even a sign that a shop had ever existed there. I searched the walls, running my fingers over the worn bricks as if I could somehow find a hidden doorway. I called out into the empty space, my voice echoing back at me. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Lost pages was gone. Or perhaps it had never existed in the first place. I stumbled back out onto the main street, my heart pounding. If the bookstore wasn't real, then what did that mean for the book? I needed someone else to see it. Someone who could tell me if I was going crazy, or if there was something genuinely unnatural about the book. There was only one person I could think of who might take me seriously. My old friend Emily. She was the kind of person who always had an open mind, who never dismissed things out of hand. We hadn't been close in recent years, but I hoped that she would still be willing to help. When I reached her apartment, I hesitated before knocking. My hand hovered in the air for a moment. Before I finally rapped on the door, she answered with a look of surprise, her expression softening when she recognized me. "Daniel, it's been a while," she said, a mix of curiosity and concern in her voice. I forced a smile, though it felt brittle. "I know, and I'm sorry to show up out of the blue like this. I need your help with something." She invited me inside, and we sat down at her small kitchen table. The book was heavy in my hands as I set it down in front of her, opening to the first blank page. Emily looked at the book, then back at me, a puzzled expression crossing her face. "It's just an old book," she said, flipping through the pages. "There's nothing written here." My stomach sank. No, there was something. There were words on the pages, detailed descriptions, almost like it was reading my thoughts.